Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the first webinar in a series of 5 entitled Prepare, that kicks off our group of webinars focused on how to start your journey to data-driven manufacturing. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. It is the icon that looks like a word bubble with a question mark inside of it over the right-hand side. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these, address them during the question and answer session at the end of today's presentation. Also, let everyone know this webinar is being recorded and will be available on social media right after the presentation is completed. I would now like to introduce Jay Ferran, Team Neo's Senior Vice President of the Industry and Innovation Group, and who is responsible for the oversight of Smart Manufacturing Cluster, the Smart Manufacturing Cluster of Northeast Ohio programs. Jay will give us a quick overview of the Smart Manufacturing Cluster of Northeast Ohio and then provide a high-level description of the webinar series, How to Start Your Journey to Data-Driven Manufacturing. So, Jay, you have
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're excited about this webinar. It's another production of the Smart Manufacturing Cluster of Northeast Ohio. Team Neo is the primary facilitator of the cluster. It is about 1.5 years old, and we're off to a great start. And we're excited about this particular webinar series because I think everyone here will find that there's something here for you, something that you can find nutritious in your effort to implement IIoT. A little bit about the cluster. First of all, the cluster's purpose is to accelerate the growth and competitiveness of the Northeast Ohio economy through industrial IIoT implementation and innovation. What we're really trying to leverage here is the 7,700 manufacturers that exist in Northeast Ohio. Our mission, very simply, is to connect IIoT knowledge, experience, tools, and networks with manufacturers that generate demand, increase productivity, spur product innovation, and develop the talent and resources necessary to drive IIoT implementation and innovation. The series, with this being the kickoff, the intent is to cover 5 different elements of your journey. And each webinar will build upon the previous webinar. Each webinar, we find this to be very important, is presented by a partnering pair of a manufacturer who's actually gone through the experience, as well as a solution provider who can provide valuable insights on this particular portion of the 5 steps. They're going to be presented every week over the next 5 weeks. So we hope you'll join us again next week at the same time for the second of the 5 steps. The emphasis will be on operational excellence, improved efficiency, and profitability of small and medium enterprise manufacturers. Additionally, because of COVID-19, we've put some special emphasis to try to understand the particular influences of COVID-19 and how they'll be highlighted at each step of the journey. I hope you'll take a look at the Smart Manufacturing Cluster. Consider becoming a member. If you would like to learn more, I encourage you to visit www.smartmanufacturingcluster.org. There you'll find our roadmap, a use case database, and a readiness assessment, among other tools to assist you in accelerating your rate of adoption and your effectiveness in implementing it. Thank you again. Back to you, Rick.
All right. So I am the Senior Director of Team Neo's Industry and Innovation Group, and I work for Jay. And I spend most of my time facilitating the activities of smart manufacturing, and of which this webinar series is a part of the program. I'm going to provide you with a little more detailed description of today's presentation, then introduce you to the speakers. So if you take a look at the slide we've got here, you can see the relationship that the Prepare has to the rest of the seminars. But we, in fact, will be talking about aspects of connect, visibility, analyze, and optimize within that same discussion on preparation. As you can imagine, all those subjects need to be addressed when you're in the preparation stage. And this is typically unique that we are emphasizing the preparation stage. I don't know if you've seen other models in the marketplace, but they typically start at connect, or at least the hardware. We found out that through our experience that we needed to spend a little more time on the preparation stage, get away from the marketing terminologies as much as possible, do something as simple as talk about data-driven manufacturing. So again, the idea is to establish a high-level understanding of data-driven manufacturing and identify applications where it can improve your type of business. Next slide. So let's talk a little deeper. Let's talk a little deeper about the slide, at least the prepare webinar itself. So we've talked about, again, establishing high level of understanding and also focusing specifically on applications and then figuring out a process to do this by. So what we intend to cover today is, again, the use manufacturing speak to convey the concepts as opposed to things like Industry 4.0 or digital transformation. We're just going to focus on data-driven manufacturing, which most people accept that term. Popular applications for DDM. Again, expectations for improved business performance. We want you to be able to establish that so you're motivated to progress throughout the rest of the journey. The organization's culture makeup, very important, got to be addressed at the preparation stage. The new normal, addressing the impact of COVID-19 on the production. Again, things like sensitivity to cash is not going to be as greatly available. Social distancing, all those impacts will change the way you plan to implement DDM. Funding resources and models, those will also become important now. Not everybody can, again, afford CapEx to put in the system. They need some additional assistance so they can get it in place and start gaining the experience or gaining the improvements for business performance and also efficiencies. Then last, selecting a solution provider to guide the manufacturer through the journey. So again, it makes sense. If you're really adventurous, you can try to this journey by yourself, but at least for the SME community, again, the small to medium enterprise organizations, it's best if you find a solution provider that is that's compatible with your culture and you feel comfortable with, and having them take you through this solution. They've done it a number of times with their clientele. All right, with that said, let's go on to the next slide. Now, I'm going to be introducing you to Mark Burris, who's the Senior Industrial Physicist at Technology House. And the manufacturer, he is the manufacturer in this sense. Remember, we talked about having a team make these presentations. So Mark is represents the manufacturer with the expertise in 3D printing parts, injection molded parts, and precision mechanical parts for the industrial, aerospace, medical, and military markets. And then we also have Kevin Jones here. Yeah, there's Mark waving at you. We also have Kevin Jones here, and see, he's smiling now too. President of Ectobox. Now he's representing the solution provider that specializes in the Internet of Things solutions for growing, data-driven business and customized software consulting and development. Now, both of these gentlemen, well, first of all, Mark's going to say a few words about the use case that he represents, again, the Technology House, what their use case was that was behind this need to go ahead and develop or implement DDM. And so he's also going to then work with Kevin to talk about how it was actually implemented. You know, again, relying on the use case as a basis for driving them forward and how it manifested itself into a plan. And then later on, we're going to have a question to answer. So again, as soon as you've got any questions, again, go ahead, enter them into the question area off to the right there, and we'll take a look at those. And as soon as both Mark and Kevin are done with the presentation, we'll jump into questions. All right. So, Mark, you want to take it away with the first slide of your presentation?
Yeah, thanks very much, Rick and Jay, for inviting me to participate in this. I see that we talked about being brief and not verbose prior to this meeting, and I see we've already burned through 11 minutes, so I'm going to have to be a lot briefer then. Anyway, let me introduce the Technology House first. We are, as you can see, a manufacturer of a wide range of products. We have a wide range of different technologies under our umbrella, ranging from very high-tech 3D printing. We have machining, very high-tech machining equipment, and we also run some pretty old injection molding machines. We have a very wide range of vintages of machines, and I'm sure that's not atypical from every other or many other manufacturers. We offer an integrated approach. So what we have here is a culture where we have some highly trained engineers. We also have a range of operators and so on. And so what we're going to try and talk about a little bit is some of the challenges that we face in our culture to the adoption of these techniques. And so I talked about our capabilities a little bit, so we could move on to our motivations for getting involved in this DDM approach. So here on the screen, you can see some of the obvious benefits from implementing DDM. And I'm fairly fortunate in that I came from a company where we built a high-tech product and we ended up designing our own factory. So we custom built and designed the factory, and we built data acquisition into it. It was completely vital for us. So I'm used to having data at my fingertips. So in fact, you know, I couldn't do any of the diagnostics and understanding our complex product without it. So I'm fairly familiar with the benefits that data-driven manufacturing can bring. So some of the things are shown here: downtime, machine availability, but also product diagnostics. And really, it drives towards improved efficiencies and understanding your process. So improved efficiencies are always good because they help the bottom line. The challenges we have here are, I think, apart from the obvious ones of connecting machines and getting data, it's actually cultural. It's who's going to look at the data and how are we going to act on it. And what I think we needed to do was to bring everybody along as a team. So we needed to include all of the operators. If they don't know why we're doing something, for example, typing information into computer screens, they don't see the benefit of that. They're not going to do it. So one of the first steps is to actually get clean data. So that's one of the main motivations, is to illustrate the benefits of this to all of the team. So talked about our motivations now a little bit. So let's just look at some of the possible outcomes. And so these are numbers that have been put together by research companies and manufacturing experts. And you can see that improving throughput and reducing scrap rework and so on, these are all good things. They all go to help your bottom line. And so with that, I'll introduce Kevin. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning.
who's going to talk a little bit more about data-driven manufacturing.
Thank you, Mark and Jay and Rick. So I'll set a little bit of groundwork here in case anybody on this call isn't familiar with the idea of data-driven manufacturing, or IIoT, industrial Internet of Things. And this will be brief, and then Mark and I will continue with our conversation. The idea of data-driven manufacturing is the combination of three different things. Of course, manufacturing, and I don't need to explain that one to you because probably all of you are manufacturers. The second is the data-driven culture, and this culture idea keeps coming up, as well as the phrase data-driven. And then there's IoT. I'm going to break those down just real quick. IoT for us is being able to pull data. Let's say this is the machine, pull data from one or more machines, push it over a network, transform that data into valuable information, present it to people, and then enable them to make decisions on it, and then most importantly, so that they can take a really proactive, valuable action on it. The data-driven culture idea is around having that data in front of you, being able to share the data with various people from, as they say, the shop floor to the top floor. Those people are empowered to analyze the data, make decisions based on that data, and then to, again, most importantly, take valuable action. And this includes operators. And so when you combine this idea of data-driven manufacturing and IoT with manufacturing, or when you combine data-driven culture with IoT and manufacturing, then you get this capability, like Mark is talking about, to be able to analyze what's going on with manufacturing. You can find and eliminate those inefficiencies. You can improve your production capacity and output. One thing that I'd like to make a brief note on is this idea of data-driven manufacturing, or excuse me, around the data-driven culture. And it's an important point to clarify, is that some companies are challenged with people who have been, we've been doing it this way for 20 or 30 years and we don't want to change. In those kinds of environments, in some cases, it might be a little difficult to have success implementing a data-driven manufacturing solution. That is where there's a challenge about getting people to accept change, to accept being able to use data rather than simply running their machine. But some companies, I think, are probably better off and more ready than they think they are for these kinds of challenges, in that if they're already running production meetings with some data, even if it's pieces of paper or an Excel spreadsheet with manually entered data, and they're already doing continuous improvement, they're already doing lean, then what this provides, this data-driven manufacturing, is real-time data, accurate data, better data, and more, and I don't mean more as in drinking from a fire hose, but more of the appropriate data that you need, that you didn't have access to, which is really valuable to you. So that gap of getting from where you're at to implementing a data-driven manufacturing solution might be a little smaller than what you think. And one thing I like to talk about is this quote that I have here on the screen, which is from Brian Sapot of SensorTracks. This really speaks to getting real. This IoT, data-driven manufacturing, is not big, glossy marketing, incredibly expensive kinds of solutions. It's getting real. The truth is that most productivity gains are much more likely to come from data-driven manufacturing analytics, run-of-the-mill continuous improvement, applied lean manufacturing techniques, and good old-fashioned, I love that phrase, good old-fashioned automation that increases capacity and throughput. It's simply taking data from your machines, using that data with the culture idea, continuing to improve how you use that data, pulling more data, et cetera, and use it to improve your manufacturing operation. So with that, there's this, again, this context of 5 steps for a data-driven manufacturing journey. And the first step is the prepare step. And in that prepare step, we have 4 different stages, let's call them. Select solution provider, establish the expectations, assess roadmap, and plan the pilot project. And I'll talk about each of those. I should also mention too that, there's that old adage that we've heard time and time again. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's why this whole prepare step in the 5 steps is incredibly important. And of course, I'm sure the presenters in each of these are going to say that their part is very important, and it is. Each of these keys is important. You can't make this full journey without any one of these 5 steps. The idea of the prepare is to start off on the right foot, as they say. So if you if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. The first step is selecting a solution provider. And in selecting a solution provider, you have to be pretty careful of what you're doing. You want to make sure that you're working with a company that has all of the capabilities necessary to put the solution in place, especially if you struggle with some of the aspects of a data-driven manufacturing solution. Even the idea of having one point of contact for the solution, or as I like to say, one throat to choke, as some companies call it as well, is really valuable. Now, this list is really long, and maybe there aren't a whole lot of companies that have this full list of capabilities, but that, if nothing else, really helps you whittle down the list of companies that are going to be able to put solutions in place for you, and the companies that you should be talking with. I mean, it includes the expertise around all of the aspects of data-driven manufacturing, having the products available to them, and maybe they don't manufacture the products themselves, but they're pulling in their partners, but they're being the systems integrator, the company, the front, the one throat to choke to be able to put these solutions in place. And then they have the expertise to put these pieces in place and do the machine connectivity, et cetera. You'll find sometimes that some companies will come in and say, yes, we can provide you a solution, but they're just providing you one piece, a platform, a gateway, a sensor, but there's more to it than that. Oh, also, I should mention too, this is kind of a long list. If you're trying to take notes, don't worry about it. This webinar is being recorded, and the slides, I think, will be available, so you can easily go back and grab some more of this information if you need to. Now let's get into a little bit of the conversation. Establishing expectations. One of the first things that a solution provider should be doing to help the manufacturer is to kind of set the table. Now, kind of like I set the table with what is data-driven manufacturing, the solution provider should be coming into the manufacturer and set the table for what they're about to get into. And that includes what are the ideas and definitions of data-driven manufacturing. Let's remove that special terminology. What's possible with data-driven manufacturing? Go over some of those expectations or those applications and outcomes that Mark talked about, and the motivations as well. Then ensure that these ideas and possibilities are realistic. And then also, again, revisiting this culture idea, make sure that the manufacturer is ready for it. Again, I'll point out the idea of the manufacturer and their culture with data. If you have people who have been doing it this way for 20, 30 years and they don't want to change, then you might struggle a little bit with your solution. But on the other hand, if you're having these production meetings, you're using some of that data, then that gap may not be significant. So this lack of data-driven manufacturing or data-driven culture shouldn't be a stopgap. It shouldn't be a place where you stall and say, oh, but we can't do it. You can work through it. You just have to be a little bit intelligent about it, and your solution provider should be able to help you with that as well. So Mark, a question for you. This is something we have been discussing before. Before coming into this whole IIoT data-driven manufacturing project, what were some of your expectations prior to the whole process about data-driven manufacturing?
Right, yeah, so based on my previous experience in my older company, which was completely wired, so I could get data from whatever I wanted. It was all in one place. I had dashboards that I could look at. So my expectation of the outcome of this was exactly that system, the shiny, glossy lights, bells, everything at my fingertips, one place to go. I could see where all the machines are going. I can see where all my product is throughout the plant. I can see progress, and I can see downtime reports and so on. So I had a pretty big expectations of the whole process, and I've been learning throughout this process. So this journey has certainly opened my eyes to some of the possibilities and also some of the limitations that you face, as Kevin says, with adoption culture, simple cost, really. So my expectations prior to the whole process, starting this, was were pretty.
So is it sounds like you maybe knew what was possible because it was done, because the whole development of the, maybe it wasn't called data-driven manufacturing at the time, but the DDM at the time was greenfield development, was all developed as the plant was built, but you knew what was possible. And now what you're going through, kind of like what you had said, is, okay, now we're going to start from scratch for an existing plant, an existing operation. And so you know where you can go, you know where you're at, then it's just simply a matter of kind of working from one point to the other. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. But the detail is what's important, because if you wanted to hook up all of your machines in your factory, for example, and have them talk to one package, we have a variety of different connectivities. So some of the machines we have PLCs and some of them don't. So you immediately start to see the challenges with connecting everything to the same type of system.
Yeah, fair, makes sense. For the sake of time, I'm going to continue on to the next stage, which is assess and roadmap. For this stage, the whole point of this is to come out with the item that is at the bottom right of the screen under part number 3 on part 3, which is the roadmap, the journey. And when I talk about the roadmap, I mean not just the roadmap for the small pilot project that you're eventually going to start to define and create and then plan in our next stage here, but I'm also talking, and I'm not talking about the roadmap just for the journey that we're talking about here, the 5 steps for data-driven manufacturing in a single or a small set of projects, but rather this is the larger roadmap. Here's where we're at, and here's where we want to get, and here are some capabilities and technologies, and here's how we operate, et cetera. How are we going to, what's the map to get to that destination? And we create that by the solution provider and the manufacturer getting together in person, workshop, well, hopefully in person with this COVID environment, and talk, workshop environment. And we've broken it up into 3 parts. And these parts are really critical for bringing out the ideas that are valuable and important for the manufacturer to really improve their operations, become more efficient, increase their capacity of production, et cetera. And it starts with defining in part 1, if you will, the first meeting or 2, a workshop session or 2, is to define the company objectives, goals, where are they going? Then of course get into the plant, create a value stream map like you can see up in the top right corner there, and then get into what are the business challenges. Map not only the manufacturing process but also the data process, and then get into the business challenges. Where are they struggling within the plant? Then define, put a value on those challenges so that you can then prioritize them and then put them on a grid, as you can see on the bottom right. And the items on the top right, you can't read it very well, but the items on the top right are the items that are least complex and have the highest value, the highest return. You can put items all over the place, and it doesn't mean that the ones that are not in that top right quadrant aren't going to get done. It's simply to say that the ones that are least complex and most valuable, those are probably the ones to consider for at least the pilot project. And then you go through and select a possible pilot project. At that point, it's a really good idea, and we've discovered this in working with Mark and had lots of discussions and whatnot. It makes sense for the manufacturer to be able to step away from the solution provider just for a little while, not too much calendar time, a week or 2, maybe calendar time, and meet on their own and say, is this realistic? Will this fit for us? Can we do this? Once they've had those discussions and come to some conclusions, then the solution provider comes back in, gets an update on what their thoughts are, a little bit of discussion and friendly debate. They then eventually select the pilot project, which is the least complex, addressing the least complex and most valuable challenge. and then at that point start to, and then develop that roadmap to get from here to here over the longer term.
Just to add to that, Kevin, I think it's valuable for the company to do that assessment in a very honest manner. Quite often in those roadmaps or workshops, you find that the loudest voice gets their way, and so quite often people at the top of the organization get their way, and it's not necessarily, I'm not saying it's always wrong, but it's not necessarily what's best for the entire organization. So that assessment needs to be a fairly frank and honest assessment.
Yeah, and I would venture to say too that a lot of the success of these sessions are up to the facilitators. And I would suggest even that there's a facilitator, of course, from the solution provider that has a lot of deep manufacturing experience and also understands these kinds of solutions. And when I say manufacturing experience, I mean they have worked at manufacturers. From a solution provider perspective, we have people on staff, our manufacturing experts in residence, if you will. And then there's a facilitator on the other side for the manufacturer as well, but it's up to them to really keep things open and honest too. Would that be fair to say, Mark?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm conscious of the time as well.
Yep, fair. The last of the 4 stages for this step of the prepare step for the whole journey is to plan the pilot project. And again, of course, the idea of if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And the idea with this step is essentially to prevent some big mistakes that I've seen before. And those mistakes, one of them, just a short story, multi-billion-dollar company that we've worked with. Their CEO talked with one of the really big consulting firms, and the consulting firm said, well, you can improve your manufacturing plants and processes and production and all this with IoT. And so the CEO said, okay, sounds good. And then he turned around and said, go forth and IoTize. And the engineer said, yes, sir, 3 bags full. And then they immediately got themselves wrapped around the axle working on sensors and data, trying to figure out what sensors to use to pull all kinds of vibration data and others from their machinery. And that was really kind of, I don't want to say that they were wrong. They're really, really smart people, but they did get themselves wrapped around the axle. And they didn't have a focus. They didn't have an objective or a goal or a business challenge, a specific business challenge to solve. And that's really where it should start. This process of planning the pilot project, as well as any of the projects, or for that matter, almost any project that you have in a company, start with the business challenge, define it pretty clearly, business case, develop that pretty clearly with a hypothesis on that challenge. And then with that, for that hypothesis and how you're going to prove it, figure out what information, analyzed information, charts, et cetera, Pareto charts with downtime reasons, maybe by duration or by count, for solving downtime, for example. What information do you need? And then from there, step down to the data. What data do you need to provide that analyzed information? And that data should be limited. No fire hoses allowed, please. Just a little bit of data. And then from there, finally get down to, and this is the last step, what technology do you need? What sensors, what gateways, et cetera, do you need to pull that data? And then when you implement the solution, then you go back up the stack. And through this process too, there are any number of deliverables that a company should be providing, including system diagrams, statements of work, project plans, the design documents, et cetera. So with that said, Mark, when we were working on this process, we provided some of those documents, system diagram, design document, et cetera. Did that and some of the other work that we did provide a level of comfort? And I'm saying this, for manufacturers out there to understand the idea of failing to plan, you plan to fail, so better plan. Did those kinds of documents help in that kind of process to give you assurance that, hey, yeah, we're going to have success with this pilot project?
Yes. Yeah, it showed a great deal of professionalism and preparedness for me, and it helped me sell the project internally. So, you've got to convince the people with the purse strings. And if you just say, oh, yeah, I think it's going to work without anything to back it up, you're going to struggle. So that's certainly an important key to that.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate what we've been talking about. These 4 different steps in this, or stages in this prepare step, really help you plan things out and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And also, I'll confirm too, this it sounds overly complicated, but I don't think it really is. I like to use the idea of the Goldilocks zone, not too complicated and not too simple. There's kind of this middle ground of reasonableness for planning sufficiently and making sure you've set the expectations sufficiently. You have a sufficient roadmap, and the roadmap is not going to be perfect. No plan ever survives a battle or something like that. But you at least have gone forth, put together some really good solid plans and ideas, and set yourself up for success. Before getting into a couple other items, Mark, any other thoughts that come to mind?
The one thing that I'm that keeps coming back to me is selling it to the team. So if you can demonstrate, and this really is part of the pilot project, I think, if you can demonstrate something which helps the person on the shop floor. So you show them the jobs that they're supposed to be working on in prioritized order, which is live, and that saves them having to go find the manager and check that they should be working on something. You can do that, or if you can provide them a piece of equipment which takes 10 minutes off writing out labels, for example, makes it more accurate, just saves a little bit of time, gives them some benefits, so they have a tangible understanding of benefits that this type of technology can bring. Then I think that goes a long way to help you sell the project.
Yeah, fair, makes sense. So getting to the wrap up here, one of the ideas that we also like to do within this Goldilocks zone of preparation and planning is to make sure that we've checked all the check boxes. It's not incredibly detailed, but there's a good list. We have a maturity model for data-driven manufacturing that we use internally, and from that maturity model, we've created a checklist. And this checklist you see on the screen here is just part of that, the checklist. But using something like this, there's a book that I've read that I really like called The Checklist Manifesto. Actually, I should have put it in the reading list slide here, but the Checklist Manifesto talks about making sure you have checklists to confirm that you have the right things done, but they're limited, they're not incredibly detailed. And this checklist helps us make sure that we've done all the right things. And it's actually helped us catch a few things that we've forgotten in some projects. This list is a bit longer than what you can see here, and so if you're interested in seeing the full list, reach out to me. Contact information is at the end of this slide deck here, or reach out to Team Nail, and then they can put us in touch. But this kind of checklist at the end of the process is a really good idea, and also, in my opinion, it's a good sign of a solution provider that has their stuff together. Lastly, funding. The joyous topic of funding. There are a lot of different ways for a project to be funded, and this is an especially important topic with the economic impact of COVID-19 and this new normal that we're now experiencing and figuring out. There are various ways to fund things, or where maybe solution providers will ask for payment. Some will say everything up front. Some will say some upfront costs and then ongoing costs for the, as Rick likes to say, the care and feeding of the solution. And then others will say ongoing cost only for putting everything together and then care and feeding. However, some of those may not work for the manufacturer, and a lot of it depends on the manufacturer's status with their cash. It depends on the value that they perceive in the data-driven manufacturing solutions. It depends on the capabilities of the solution provider and what other funding sources are available. And if there's a mismatch between the manufacturer wanting to pay for the solution, or how they can pay for the solution and what the solution provider is asking for, then there's an opportunity to look for other ways to fund the project. And some of those are for the manufacturer to revisit the value, maybe change the structure of the project, reduce the work being done, but still making sure that they're getting exceptional return on investment. And the same thing could be said with a solution provider. Maybe they could revisit how they're pricing the product. They could be a little bit flexible, or seek a source of funding for themselves, each separately and together. Maybe it could go to the banks for some funding sources there, loans, et cetera. And there are some other creative ways that Rick and Team Neo are working on to provide those kinds of solutions. And then there are sometimes some public sources like economic development organizations to be able to do that. But what it really gets down to is make sure that you have a really good solid value defined for the solution, that there is strong value for the solution, and also that you've ensured that there's a strong potential for success. And if you have that, then you have something to talk about. Then you have a good reason to try to figure out how to fund the project. With that, Rick, I'll turn it over to you to close it out. Rick, there you go.
Let's see if we've got any questions first. So here's one I'm going to throw at you. How long does the assessment process take? And I throw that at Mark. What did you go through?
Well, it really depends on level of engagement, really. We spent at least 2 whole days with our whole team working on interactions, meetings with solution providers. That's quite a challenge to get everybody in the same room on the same day. So when I mean our whole team, I mean people from senior leadership, finance, sales, operations, and to try to find a day when they're all available, that's a challenge. And essentially what we did was we brainstormed, then we went away and we tried to filter down the brainstorm ideas into the sort of values that Kevin's been talking about. And I'd say that took us at least a week of time, but that was spread out over a couple of months.
All right. And back to you, Kevin, how much time did you put in with your organization to support TTH in putting that implementation plan together?
For us, on our part, I think if you were to talk about person hours, maybe a few days, several days, something to that effect. And these processes can be spread out over a matter of 1 to 2 calendar weeks, up to maybe a month or more. And again, it really depends on engagement and timing. There are vast periods of time where nothing's happening because we have to wait for somebody to be available for our next meeting, that kind of thing.
All right. And another question, and then we'll do some closing. So what if the manufacturer wants to do some of the work listed in the solution provider capabilities themselves? What do they do? Is there some kind of, are they allowed to participate in that process to do what they can to reduce cost?
Sure, absolutely. It simply is a matter of, well, it's like a lot of answers to a lot of questions. Well, it depends. Depends on what they want to do. If they have really strong capabilities in those areas, and it makes a lot of sense, and also the people that will be doing that work are available, so it's capable and available, and they are to work with, et cetera, then yeah, absolutely. The idea is not for the solution provider to take it all and do it all themselves, but rather work together as a team to put the solution in place. And so, yeah, absolutely, it makes sense. Simply just have to have the detailed conversations about that. You know, when we talk about machine connectivity, do they really know? Are they a controls engineer, an applications engineer? Do they understand machine connectivity? And they do that kind of thing. Just have to work details, but it makes sense.
All right, let's close out now then. If anyone has any additional information or any other questions they'd like answered, go ahead, send them on to me. That's rickearls@teamneo.org. Also, we've got some recommended reading here. I won't go through each one of them, but it's normally an issue when you when you go searching for additional help on the web, there's 3 million hits you get anytime you search for something. So this will help you get to the information you're looking for much faster. So there's a recommended reading list, there's a recommended viewing list, and a recommended resources list here that in many instances are focused not only on the journey, but also specifically on the preparation stages. Also, you will receive a follow-up email within 28 to 48 hours with a link to the PowerPoint presentation. And and then as we also said, the webinar was recorded, so that should be up shortly at some point in time with regards to many of the links on social media. Now, with that said, on behalf of our smart manufacturers, the cluster, and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of the day. I think that should be it.